Welcome to the Paris Cachée podcast. In each episode, we travel to a new arrondissement of Paris to reveal one lieu caché, the hidden place. It might be a mysterious monument, a quirky café, a secret garden, or a shop frozen in time. No matter what it is, it'll always be hidden in plain sight and always have an intriguing story to tell. I'm your host, Lily Heisey of the blog Je T'aime Me Neither and author of 3 books on Paris, including my latest called There's Only One Paris, Tales for Our Times. I've been living in Paris for over 20 years and I'm always on the lookout for the city's best, cool, and secret spots. So, without further ado, let's uncover our latest Paris Cachée. This new episode of Paris Cachée travels over to the 6th arrondissement, a district which extends west from the Boulevard Saint-Michel to the Rue des Saint-Pères and Rue de Sèvres, and descends south from the Seine River to the Montparnasse area. The 6th is most famously known for its Saint-Germain neighborhood, which people often associate with bohemian writers smoking cigarettes, drinking too much wine or coffee, and debating for hours at cafes. But the district's connections to Paris's literary history actually go much further back in time than the Lost Generation. Much, much further. To uncover these, we're going to visit a special bookshop, a magical place, a place which seems from another era, a place which will take us on a voyage extraordinaire, an extraordinary voyage. Ready to get dusting off some books and rocket back in time? There are over 700 bookshops in Paris, a quantity which probably makes it the city with the most bookshops in the world. Over 200 of these, a whopping 30% of the capital's total, are concentrated in a mere 2 arrondissements, the 5th and the 6th. The 5th arrondissement might technically have more bookshops than the 6th. However, a good number of these are specialized in educational books. We'll be getting into Paris's literary history shortly, but it was in taking visitors through the area on one of my tours of the left bank that a shop window in the 6th first caught my eye. A shop located on a street which made the history books for an entirely different bookshop, a famed English language bookshop, which no longer exists at this location. My unique shop doesn't specialize in regular books, that is, in paperbacks, non-fiction, or academic books. It has a very specific focus, a type of book which allows readers to go on phenomenal imaginary adventures and to incredible worlds. But before we visit the shop, we need to put it into the context of the neighborhood's publishing history, one which goes back over 500 years. It's no coincidence that so many bookshops are found in this part of Paris. If you listen to the last episode of the podcast on the Collège de Beauvais and Paris's medieval colleges, you will likely recall that the left bank of Paris used to be nicknamed the University, and much of the area's activities were focused on education. Well, to serve these purposes, books were also required, And so, in addition to instructors and students, the left bank also attracted a great number of papermakers, bookbinders, copiers, illuminators, bookshops, and printing presses. Oh, the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg's 1439 invention of the mechanical movable type printing press revolutionized the course of civilization and ushered in the possibility of quick mass communication. Imagine what our lives would be like without it. No internet, no computers, no phones. Well, if he hadn't come up with the device, someone else inevitably would have. However, a different path would have been forged for the planet. His technology made its way around Europe, quickly enough, yet at a much slower pace than today's fiber optics. That said, it took 30 years for the first book to be printed in France, a historic event which took place at the Collège de la Sorbonne in 1470. This was in epistolae by an Italian humanist called Gasparino Barizza, a collection of letters in Latin to be used as examples for Parisian students. In fact, like Gutenberg's famous Bible, most of the earlier books printed in France were of religious subject matter. Before the arrival of the printing press, there were, of course, books. However, these were individually and painstakingly copied out by hand, often by monks in the left bank's monasteries, which meant that they took a very, very long time to make. Of this era, Voltaire once said, "Books were rare and more expensive than precious gemstones." Imagine that! Most colleges had their own libraries, including the Collège de Beauvais from the last episode. These were usually formed by collections bequeathed to them by each college's wealthy benefactors. Because books were so valuable, they were chained to the shelves to prevent them from being stolen. Forget having to pay late dues. There were no loans at all. The printing press changed all of this. Books were suddenly much more readily available. By 1500, so in a mere 30 years from the technology's arrival in Paris, there were already 75 printers in the capital. The distribution system of books was rather different from today, as many of these printing companies had their own bookshops, which only stocked the books they themselves printed. Bookshops were generally lined one after another on certain streets of the left bank. Talk about dog-eat-dog competition. In order to woo customers into their shops, instead of the neighboring ones, some of these early bookshops took on unusual names, like the Wild Man or the Elephant. Wow, these were really gargantuan times. A pair of clever bookshop owners from the era, Jacques Caillot and Jean Charpentier, decided to sell pots of wine as well as books, a smart marketing tactic which proved rather successful. Some of the area's most famous bookshops were over on the same street of our beloved Collège de Beauvais. I wonder if any of these eventually sold books written by the famous musketeer who went to that school. The industry got so big in the area that there were 160 bookshops and printing houses on Rue Saint-Jacques alone. What a book lover's dream! A sort of book revolution happened in 1525. This date marks the printing of a special book by a renowned university lecturer of the time, Geoffroy Tory. It was a copy of the Book of Hours, a popular Christian devotional book of the times. The subject matter in itself wasn't all that innovative. However, with it, he introduced the concept of type design, which did not duplicate handwriting. Think of this in terms of calligraphy versus good old standard Times New Roman or Arial font. This concept was born out of Tory's book, an act which transformed book designing from mere printing into an art form. Tory then went on to acquire French text to be printed, at a time when Latin was the only language used for books. He also was the person responsible for introducing accents into the French language. Holy! Perhaps this was one thing we could use a time machine to go back in time to change. Ah, a time machine, huh? We may very well be encountering one later on. After Tory's innovations, a particular note in printing history of the 16th century is its use to help diffuse Protestantism. Then, towards the end of the century, there was a crucial turning point in literary history, the birth of the author. This was thanks to three great writers from three different European countries. France's Michel de Montaigne with his essays, published in 1580, Spain's Miguel de Cervantes with his 1605 classic Don Quixote, and England's Shakespeare with his first folio, a collection of his plays, published in 1623, 7 years after his death. No more books on chains. No more books chained to religious or academic topics. The literary imagination was let loose, and many other greats were to follow and fly freely. The creative ship was setting sail. The 1600s also brought the arrival of brochures, or chapbooks, tales or religious stories printed on cheap paper and sold by traveling peddlers. The bookshop brought to you, light years ahead of Amazon or downloadable ebooks. The 1700s made way for the great thinkers of the Enlightenment era and the birth of the encyclopedia, whereas the industrial advances of the 1800s allowed books to be printed even quicker, thanks to steam engines, which truly ushered in mass access to books and newspapers, an innovation which made them more democratic. We'll be right back with Paris Cachée after a word from our sponsors. And now back to Paris Cachée. The current 20 arrondissements of Paris were established in 1860, and an invisible wall was put up in the world of the university, the Boulevard Saint-Michel, the new border between the 5th and 6th districts. Many of the most important publishing houses set up west of this border, in the 6th. Among these was one of France's legendary literary powerhouses, Hachette, which was founded in 1826 at 12 to 14 Rue Pierre Sarrazin, and was originally specialized in academic textbooks and travel guides. By 1896, Hachette owned 1,200 bibliothèques de gare, book kiosks in train stations. In 1914, they bought up Pierre Jules Herzl, the publisher of a certain writer we will be shortly discussing. which brought Hachette's turnover to a biblical sum of 60 million gold francs, the equivalent of around 200 million euros today. Their operations spread from Rue Pierre-Sarrazin across Boulevard Saint-Germain and Saint-Michel. The Odeon area was the place to be in the book world, and the neighboring streets also filled with bookshops. Still to this day, there is a high concentration on Rue Monsieur le Prince and Rue de l'Odeon, the location of our special shop. Rue de l'Odeon isn't just any street. It was where two very important bookshops were located, which leads us into the 20th century. In 1915, a young French woman opened a bookshop at number 7 Rue de l'Odeon. This was Adrienne Monnier, and her shop was called La Maison des Amis des Livres, or the House of the Friends of Books. Monnier had been working as a secretary at a publishing house called l'Université des Annales. After a serious work accident, her father gave Monnier all the compensation money he'd received so she could achieve her dream of opening her own shop. She chose Rue de l'Odeon due to its proximity to the area's great publishing houses, and her new shop made her one of France's first female bookshop owners. A few years later, in 1922, another important bookshop opened up across the street at number 12. This was the second incarnation of Shakespeare and Company, the shop of Monnier's partner Sylvia Beach, whose first shop, which the American opened in 1919, had been a short distance away at number 8 Rue du Poitrin. It was at this location, not the newer shop we know as Shakespeare and Company over on Rue de la Boucherie, which became an important meeting place for the lost generation writers of the 1920s. Imagine the personalities who've taken this street before us. Ernest Hemingway, Gertrude Stein, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, and James Joyce, who nicknamed it Stratford-on-Odeon, while Monnier and Beach called it Odonia. Although Beach closed her shop down in 1941 during the German occupation of Paris, and didn't reopen it after the city was liberated in 1944, Monnier had kept hers open all the way until her death in 1955. The street's literary heritage lives on to this day thanks to its 3 publishing houses and 5 bookshops, including our special bookshop, one which is found next door to where Monnier's shop was, and which is dedicated to one of France's most widely published and imaginative authors, Jules Verne. Although the bookshop is called Le Monte Cristo, after Alexandre Dumas' classic, this enchanting shop is focused on this other 19th century French literary heavyweight. Ah, Jules Verne. Few French writers have so enlivened readers' imaginations around the whole world. He is best known for Les Voyages Extraordinaire, a series of adventure novels including Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas, and Around the World in 80 Days. Famed during his lifetime, since 1979, Verne has been the second most translated author in the world, sandwiched between Agatha Christie and William Shakespeare. So what extraordinary voyage brought Verne to such great heights. Born and raised in the Loire city of Nantes in 1828, Verne wrote his first novel in his teens, but despite his interest in literature, his father had other plans for him to take over his law practice. So off young Jules went to study law in Paris. Although he was serious about his studies, Verne kept writing on the side and had a first story published in 1851, coincidentally the year he also finished his degree. It was a short historical adventure story entitled The First Ship of the Mexican Navy, a theme which would help set the course of Verne's adventure-driven tales based on in-depth research and featuring the various exciting new technologies that the 19th century was bringing. In the end, Verne disappointed his father by rejecting a career in law in pursuit of writing. During the rest of the 1850s, Verne had several other stories published in magazines, but the real turning point in his career was in 1862 when he met Pierre-Jules Hetzel, the publisher of Honoré de Balzac, Georges Sand, Victor Hugo, among others. Hetzel had been working on a new high-quality family magazine, and after reading the manuscript of a novel Verne was working on, later called 5 Weeks in a Balloon, Hetzel thought Verne's imaginative tales would be perfect content for the magazine. He established a contract with Verne for a set number of serialized stories per year at a fixed rate. These would become the Voyage extraordinaire, Extraordinary Voyages, a collection which would total 54 novels by Verne, published between 1863 and 1905, the year of Verne's death. Many original copies of Les Voyages Extraordinaires are available at our special shop, La Librarie, Monte Cristo. The picture-perfect bookshop replaced a previous one on the same site that also specialized in Jules Verne. The Monte Cristo was opened in 1989 by Philippe Maillot, a historian and Jules Verne expert. Maillot is solicited for his expertise for auctions, other analysis, and has also written a guide to Jules Verne. The shop may only be 30 years old. However, its wooden shelves and cozy ambiance help take you on a journey not ahead in time as Verne might have liked, but back to a century and a half ago to the author's epoch. As you walk down the quiet Rue de l'Odéon, the bookshop's classic facade is on the left. You can simply peer into the shop's window to marvel at its beautiful books. But don't be afraid to go inside. Philippe and his team are welcoming, and you can have a little gander around. There are also some books in English. The bookshop focuses on first edition copies of Verne's books, but also other authors of the era. What makes these books so special is that they are usually illustrated and have stunning covers which add to the shop's enchantment. These gorgeous works make me think back to those early books created on the left bank, illustrated religious works and books of hours so meticulously copied out by hand and featuring delicate drawings with gold leaf and intricate details. Verne's stories look to the future instead of the past. Although real paper books might themselves become one day a thing of the past, it's bookshops like this one which are keeping not only the history of the left bank's book heritage alive, but also of print books in general. This is what I love most about this shop. So instead of buying an overpriced coffee at the Café de Flore or Le Demago, and imagining Hemingway and Fitzgerald sitting there at their tables, why not soak up the literary vibes of the district on Rue de l'Odéon? Or better yet, either here or elsewhere, buy and read a book. You don't necessarily have to do this at the Monte Cristo. If you're more interested in modern books, you can find a great collection of English books a short walk away at the Red Wheelbarrow, also found in the 6th arrondissement. Or a little amble will take you into the 5th district, to the rest of the university sector of Paris, where you can browse the charming Abbey bookshop or the new version of Shakespeare and Company, originally opened as Le Mistral by George Whitman in 1951. You can also find a listing of the 200 other bookstores in the 5th and 6th on the website of an association called the Comité Quartier Latin. Their website is www.cql.fr. We hope you've enjoyed Season 1 of Paris Cachée. Don't forget to check back on Wednesdays for my weekly podcast, Romancing in Paris. Paris Cachée is produced by Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please go to parisundergroundradio.com.